So you've seen the Final Fantasy series around, and you've always been on the outskirts of it, but you don't know if you should give it a shot or not. Don't worry, my friend, you're in the right place. I'm gonna go over everything you need to know, whether you're brand new to the series or maybe you just haven't played in a while. And at the end of this video, I'll also tell you where you should start in the series. Just in case you're not sure, I've got you covered. Final Fantasy is a video game series that was created in 1987 by a developer known as Square, or Squaresoft, but more specifically by a fellow called Hironobu Sakaguchi. More like Sakaguchi! I'm sorry, I had to get that out, I'm sorry. The first game was heavily inspired by other RPGs out at that time, like Dragon Warrior, which is interesting now considering, well, we'll get into that in a minute. Dungeons & Dragons also had a hand in inspiring Sakaguchi to make the game too, and the evidence of this lies within some of the enemy designs, like this here fella called Evil Eye. Compare that with the D&D counterpoint, The Beholder. While other RPGs did exist at the time, Final Fantasy just felt more alive. The world felt more cohesive. There was a bit more challenge. The dungeons felt more dungeony. And it was an impressive mix of level design with the soundtrack composed by the legendary Nobuo Uematsu that made it feel dungeony. I don't know how else to put it. Players also traversed the sky too with their very own airship, which for 1987 was really something. For reference, Tecmo Bowl, Zelda 2, and Mike Tyson's Punch-Out were all released that same year, and are there airships in any of those games? Even from this early entry in the series, Final Fantasy I established some staples that lasted throughout the entire series. Airships being the big thing, but also crystals, the elements using a rock, paper, scissors style of battle, such as fire is weak against ice, so on and so forth. Another thing that this game established was the baseline right before the battle begins. This lasted from the original Final Fantasy in 1987 to the release of Final Fantasy VII in 1997, and was resurrected briefly in 2000 for Final Fantasy IX. Final Fantasies 2 and 3 established further staples like chocobos, moogles, and summoning creatures. And when gaming moved from 8-bit to 16-bit, so too did the Final Fantasy series, ultimately leading to the widely loved Final Fantasy IV, and more importantly than that, the monumental masterpiece known as Final Fantasy VI, which then led to the landmark release of Final Fantasy VII. And even if we were to just stop there, that's only 10 years of existence. Stop and think about that. 10 years of making games led to Final Fantasy VII, where Square and Sony put $40 million into simply advertising alone. Imagine making games for 10 years and being able to put $40 million in just ads for your newest game. And here's the crazy part, we are now 25 years after that landmark release, and the amount of players across the world has done nothing but grow. For reference, at the time of writing this, there are over 1.5 million daily players of Final Fantasy XIV. For years and years, the Final Fantasy series paved the way in terms of graphics and storytelling, and it influenced other games like Fantasy Life, Undertale to a point, and later Dragon Quest games, which is kind of funny. Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy has always been sort of rivals, kind of. I mean, in Final Fantasy I, you'll find the grave of Erdrick, which is the main protagonist of Dragon Quest I. But in the early 2000s, Square merged with Enix, the developers of Dragon Quest, and now Square is just as synonymous with Dragon Quest as they are with Final Fantasy. Even the grave in Final Fantasy I changed to represent another rival in the game space, a certain tunic-wearing, left-handed fella from Hyrule. But listen, everything I've said so far only answers that question from a technical standpoint. If you ask 100 Final Fantasy fans what is Final Fantasy, you'll likely get 100 different answers. It's no secret that I think the best Final Fantasy of all time is Final Fantasy VI, but what is it that makes that game so magical for me? Is it strictly related to the nostalgia that I revel in when playing the game, or is it actually amazing? Well, in order for me to answer this, I'm gonna have to ultimately answer the question of what makes the entire series so awesome. So if you're new to the series, I would pay attention just a little bit here. I'm gonna just simply say words that anyone that has played the game will understand, but anyone who hasn't played the game will be vastly confused. And it will also explain some of the themes within the game. Amnesia, an opera, an octopus, the apocalypse, teenage pregnancy, suicide, and a clown. Sounds like just a bunch of random words, but if you play through the game, you'll see that every one of these things are in the game fairly prominently, if I'm being honest. Granted, not every Final Fantasy game has this kind of wild group of words combining to make a story, or do they? Let's try Final Fantasy IV. Why do I continually do this to myself? Okay. A dark night, betrayal, the moon, a large whale, a spoony bard, a large robot, and dwarves. Yeah, maybe every Final Fantasy is like that if I think about it. But the thing is, yes, those things all inherently sound crazy if you just list them in order like that. But Square does a fantastic job of taking all of those things and makes them into one coherent story, and it all works. Mostly. And by the time the credits are finished rolling, you've been on quite the roller coaster. You've completed something amazing. The story isn't the only thing in these games that really make an impact on you, but the characters too. On average, you'll spend roughly 30 to 60 hours with these characters and these amazing stories. You'll feel a connection with everything, and it's because of the storytelling techniques used in the game that accomplish this. But here's the thing, just as with anything else in life, Final Fantasy just isn't for everyone. But I do feel like those people that wouldn't like the series are still missing out on the stories of the game. They're compelling, they're decently complex, they're worth checking out. Maybe that's something that I'll try to do in the future. Retell the story from each game in a classic storytelling manner. I don't know, that's a ton of work, but what do you think? Should I do that? Now, if you're ready to kick off your Final Fantasy journey, I've actually got a video right here that will lead you in the right direction of where to start.